When crimes are committed, very few members of the public have any sympathy for those who are sent to prison for any period of time, but certain crimes provoke a bigger outcry than others. For example, sexual assaults or anything having to do with children will always bring around understandably emotional reactions towards the perpetrators. But could you imagine being on the receiving end of this kind of public hatred when you didn't commit the crime you were accused of? This is exactly what happened to Andrew Malkinson in 2004. This is a tragic case of wrongful imprisonment and lazy policing. We would like to send our sincere condolences to both victims in this case, one of them, Andrew Malkinson, and the other, who remains anonymous to this day. Andrew Malkinson was born on the 23rd of January 1966. During the 80s and 90s, Malkinson spent a lot of time traveling and backpacking. He was originally from Grimsby in Lincolnshire and was determined to go and see new places, something a lot of young people like to do. In the early 2000s, Malkinson had settled in the Netherlands, known as Holland to some people, where he happily lived and worked. But in 2003, he decided to return to the UK, a decision that would change his life forever. The summer of 2003 was a very hot one in the UK, and on such a hot day, the early morning hours of July the 19th to be precise, an event would take place that would change not only Malkinson's life forever, but also that of a 33-year-old mother. The lady, who has chosen to remain anonymous, was making her way home to a place called Little Hulton in the Greater Manchester area when, in the dark of night, she was set upon by a violent attacker near a highway embankment. The lady was violently dragged down the side of the embankment, mercilessly attacked before being sexually assaulted. As a result, she suffered a severely swollen eye that she couldn't open, a fractured cheekbone, and a bruised neck that she acquired as her attackers strangled her until she fell unconscious. After falling unconscious, she was sexually assaulted, leaving even more bruises and scrapes on her arms and legs, not to mention some very serious injuries to her left nipple. The severely injured and obviously distressed lady was found some hours later, and Greater Manchester Police got to work on finding out who had committed this heinous crime. In cases like this, the police are under immediate pressure from the public and the media alike, whether it be a rapist or a murderer. When someone like this is on the loose, public trust in the police decays if they're unable to find the person responsible. Mr. Malkinson, new to the area and having just returned to the UK, seemed an obvious suspect to police. He was arrested and questioned by them, maintaining his innocence the entire time. The problem was, nobody would listen to him. He explained to the police that he never went out at night. As we previously mentioned, he had been in the area for just a matter of weeks. He had a job and no real friends to speak of. He said that after work he was tired. He would go to a local shop, pick up a few cans of beer, and then go home and sit in front of the TV. But there was a problem for Andrew. Despite the police being unable to connect him to the crime via DNA or any concrete evidence, they managed to find two witnesses who said they saw Andrew in the area at the time of the assault, and when he was put in front of an identity parade or lineup, the victim also picked him out. Now let's take a step back for just a moment. This was in the early morning hours. It was dark. Could any witness, let alone two, be 100% certain that they saw Andrew? And then the victim herself. She suffered a very traumatic experience that nobody should have to go through. But given the chaos of the situation, could she be certain of who had attacked her? The entire case against Andrew was based on two witnesses and the victim herself. Some key details were also missing at the time of the arrest. The victim described her attacker as having a smooth chest, but Andrew had a hairy chest and had tattoos. Also, in a brave attempt to make her attacker more identifiable, the lady said that she made a deep scratch down the man's face from the cheek to the jaw. When the police went to see Andrew the next day, there were no marks on him. The victim had said that she scratched so hard and deep that she broke her fingernail. In fact, the only bit of the description that fit Andrew was that he had olive-tanned skin. The victim said her attacker had dark skin, but of course that could apply to any number of people. In early 2004, Andrew Malkinson went on trial, accused of 2 counts of rape, suffocating or strangling with intent to commit rape, and attempted murder. In court, the Crown Prosecution Service explained why they had no DNA evidence against Andrew. In their words, there was no concrete evidence because Andrew was forensically aware, meaning that he had been extremely careful not to leave traces of himself behind. We have already described the horrific nature of the attack and the ferocity with which it was conducted. Is it really plausible that such an attack could happen without any DNA being left behind? Despite the case being purely circumstantial, Andrew was convicted of sexual assault and physical assault. He was handed a life sentence with a minimum term behind bars of 7 years from the time of arrest. He had already served 6 months, which would mean he would serve another 6.5 years unless he could successfully appeal his sentence. Despite Andrew being a placid, soft-spoken person, he was sent to some of the most notorious prisons in the UK, including HMP Garth in Leyland, Lancashire, which is a Category B prison, and HMP Frankland in the north of England. Frankland is the home to some of Britain's most dangerous criminals, from pedophiles to terrorists. As a convicted sex offender, life would be very hard for him on the inside. There is a pecking order depending on the crimes that you have been convicted of, and anyone inside for sexual-based crimes or crimes related to children are right at the bottom of the food chain. Andrew had to live every day in fear for his life. Every other inmate wanted a chance to make a name for themselves by harming a sex offender. He also suffered what he called psychological abuse from some of the prison guards, or screws as they're referred to by inmates. Whenever he applied for something as simple as a pair of trainers, the application wouldn't be processed or they would just go missing. He blamed this on the fact that he refused to partake in any rehabilitation courses with other sex offenders. Far from giving in to the system, he was determined to prove his innocence, but this came at a price. If he refused to take any of the courses offered or accept his guilt, his sentence would be prolonged. In 2006, he launched his first appeal to overturn his conviction. It was rejected as fast as it was put in. For the time being, he would remain in prison. In August of 2009, he tried once again to get his appeal re-examined, this time appealing to the CCRC, or the Criminal Cases Review Commission. Documents later revealed what his case handler shockingly put in their notes. Read the papers today. I am slightly bemused by the submissions. Just because it appears that someone else's DNA was on the complainant's vest, not the boyfriend's or the applicant's, this cannot surely produce a successful referral in view of all of the other strong ID evidence. In other words, the police and the authorities had found DNA belonging to another person on the victim's clothes, but they believed the ID evidence was so strong that this did not warrant another investigation as to whether they had the right man in Malkinson behind bars. In December that same year, Greater Manchester Police and the Crown Prosecution Service, or CPS, did meet forensic scientists to discuss the DNA found. The forensic scientist did advise them a test could be done to determine whether the DNA was male or female. Although the prosecution service did acknowledge that the DNA was crime-specific and very relevant, they advised against doing the test, and no further work was requested. Again, the documents revealed showed that the CPS said that unless there was to be a further appeal against Malkinson's conviction, there was no point in continuing with any further tests. In other words, unless Andrew kicked up a stink, they would leave him to rot in prison without further investigation. Despite this new DNA evidence, the CCRC rejected Malkinson's protests in 2012 without commissioning any further testing. As far as the authorities were concerned, Malkinson could and should remain in jail. By now, Malkinson was losing all hope of getting out. He was still refusing to take courses for a crime he did not commit, and as a result, he had no release date. His 7-year tariff had come and gone, and he would serve well past that time as sort of a punishment for not admitting his alleged guilt. In 2016, Andrew Malkinson had now served 13 years of a prison sentence that was supposed to be 7 years. But his luck was about to unexpectedly change. A prominent crime journalist at the time, who is now sadly deceased, Bob Woodenfen, released a book called Casualties of Justice. This focused on cases that had real, doubtful outcomes. In the book, he included a chapter on Andrew Malkinson. As a result of the book, in 2017, a legal charity called Appeal decided to contact Andrew and review his case. Their mission statement is simply a charity and law practice that fights miscarriages of justice and demands reform. Andrew Malkinson finally had a formidable team fighting in his corner, and they were not going to give up easily. In 2018, Appeal went to the CCRC and asked them to review the evidence, both circumstantial and the DNA sample. Shockingly, this was rejected again out of hand. The police did not even consent to double-checking their own database to see if anyone else fitted the description given by the attacker. In 2020, another appeal is launched, which is once again rejected by the CCRC. Despite the efforts of the CCRC and the Crown Prosecution Service to try to deter the charity from pursuing the case, they would not stop. After the latest appeal was rejected, the charity changed tack. They now knew that by appealing through the chain of command, they would not get anywhere. So they skipped the Case Review Commission and the Crown Prosecution Service, instead choosing to go after the police directly. Appeal wanted access to all of the police files, case notes, and evidence so they could examine it for themselves. Andrew was finally released from prison in December 2020 for good behavior. He had served 17 years, 10 more than he was specified by the judge. But he was still on license or parole. He was not allowed to travel. He had to make the police aware of his whereabouts, and he had to sign the sex offenders register. So he was not really a free man. He was still a sex offender in the eyes of the law. This was not good enough for Andrew or the charity Appeal. Only a full quashing of his conviction would do. The police, you may not be surprised to hear, rejected the charity's request to access of their evidence. So, instead, Appeal took the police to court. After a lengthy battle with them, in 2022, Appeal was granted access to the police files, and most importantly, to the DNA sample, which up until now had remained very secretive. Appeal immediately commissioned their own independent DNA testing. This quickly revealed the DNA was not only a male sample, but when the police had run the findings through their database, another man, not Andrew Malkinson, immediately came up. To make matters worse, the man had been on the police database since 2012. As soon as the findings were revealed, they appealed to the CCRC again to have Andrew's conviction finally overturned. This time, the Case Review Commission was unable to stonewall any longer. In 2022, a man was arrested in connection with the case, a full 19 years after Andrew had been sent to prison. As yet, he has not been convicted of the crime, but it does remain under investigation. Finally, in January of 2023, the CCRC referred Andrew's case to the Courts of Appeal, and in July of this year, the three Court of Appeal judges all agreed that Andrew Malkinson had been the victim of a grave miscarriage of justice, and his conviction was finally overturned.
We have no doubt that the new evidence shows these convictions to be unsafe. Accordingly, we formally receive the new scientific evidence as fresh evidence. We allow the appeals against conviction in relation to all the offences, and we quash the convictions. Mr. Malkinson, having waited so many years, you leave the court a free man.
Andrew Malkinson is finally a free man. When he was first wrongly arrested by the police, he was 37 years old. When he was finally released from prison, he was 54 years old. By the time his conviction had been overturned, he was 57 years old.
I came to the police station in 2003 and told the officers I was innocent. They didn't believe me. I came to the Crown Court in Manchester in 2004 and told the jury I was innocent. They didn't believe me. I came to this appeal court in 2006 and told them I was innocent. They didn't believe me. I applied to the Criminal Cases Review Commission. which is supposed to investigate miscarriages of justice, and told them I was innocent. They didn't investigate, and they didn't believe me. Not once, but twice. Today we told this court I was innocent, and finally they listened.
Andrew Malkinson is now a free man, but nothing in this world could possibly give him back the 17 years he spent rotting in a prison cell, nor the future 3 years he spent trying to prove his innocence. He may have proved that innocence, but the battle is not over yet. Andrew is pursuing the authorities for significant compensation for the injustice he suffered. He and Appeal both want to see people from the Case Review Commission, the Crown Prosecution Service, and the Greater Manchester Police held accountable for their failures. Greater Manchester Police are already in special measures in the UK for previous bad conduct, and they now face a fresh investigation. During the lineup, when Andrew was picked out by the victim of the crime, he alleges that the police basically stitched him up and made sure that he was the one she picked out. The victim described someone with dark skin wearing a black t-shirt. During the lineup, Andrew was the only dark-skinned person present, and they even dressed him in a black t-shirt. The only thing the police didn't do was put a sign on his chest saying, "Pick me." Just when you thought the authorities could not have acted any worse, as he was released from prison, Mr. Malkinson was told that whatever compensation he received would have to be reduced to pay for his bed and board while he was in prison. Naturally, this provoked an angry response from the public and Mr. Malkinson's legal team. This ridiculous statement has now been withdrawn by the authorities. Remember the 2 eyewitnesses who helped to convict Andrew? Lawyers have tried to have their past character disclosed in court, but it was rejected by the police and the Crown Prosecution Service. It turned out that these witnesses were not necessarily as pure as they were made out to be. Both of them had long criminal records. One of them was a longtime heroin user. To make matters worse, just a couple of weeks after identifying Andrew, one of them was rearrested again. It was also later revealed that the sighting was extremely brief, as they only caught a fleeting glance as they whizzed by in a moving vehicle. We must also not forget the other victim in this case, the lady who was seriously beaten and sexually assaulted. Andrew Malkinson says he does not hold any grudge against her. She was brought into the lineup in what was described as a very mentally unstable condition. The last place she should have been at the time was potentially facing a lineup of men that may or may not have contained someone who had attacked her. Because of the botched and lazy investigation by the police and other authorities, she now has to relive the entire ordeal over again. Still, nobody has been convicted of the horrific crime that she suffered. Had the police investigated all of the evidence properly from the start, they could have caught the real culprit, but now 2 decades have passed, and the chances of actually finding the criminal are much slimmer. We have to remember that, although their ordeals were very different, Andrew Malkinson and the anonymous lady were both victims in equal measure. Both failed by the very organizations that were set to protect citizens and who are charged with the first duty of any government to look after the safety of its people. Andrew Malkinson says that he no longer wishes to be associated with the UK. Had he not been sent to prison, he would have returned to Holland and would have become a full-time citizen long ago. He has now left the UK and is back in the Netherlands, but due to Brexit, he's only allowed to stay for 3 months at a time. He is appealing to the UK government to speak with the Dutch authorities to try to get him a Dutch passport so he can live there permanently and never live in the UK again.
It's absolutely outrageous, isn't it?
It is a truly ghastly, shameful story. Not only do the CPS and Greater Manchester Police come in for a lot of rightly placed criticism, but the Criminal Cases Review Commission do not come out of this covered in any glory whatsoever. It is absolutely scandalous. And that DNA sample that was found was discovered in saliva on an item of clothing of the victim close to a site where she had suffered a serious bite wound. It was so blatantly obvious that this DNA, number one, could exonerate Mr. Malkinson, and number two, could point in the direction of the person who actually did commit this crime. It is a shameful episode. I wish Mr. Malkinson the very best in compensation. Not that he's going to get those 17 years back, but I'm glad to see the petition has gone over 100,000 names, which might get this debated in the House of Commons.
Well, indeed.
We at Beyond Evil sincerely hope that both of the victims in this case are able to rebuild their lives and live as well as they can for the rest of their years. If you found this story compelling, don't forget to like the video, comment down below your take on it, and please subscribe to the channel. Less than half of the folks who watch our videos are subscribers. It's free and easy, and it makes it possible for us to continue to bring you great true crime content. Also, hit the notification bell in order to stay up to date each time we reveal a new shocking case. Until next time, stay safe and keep your eyes peeled. You never know what's lurking in the shadows.